Hey there guys, this is Richard, your host, with another marvellous video. With Daemon Targaryen singing to Vermithor in the season finale, it's become quite apparent that the old King's dragon will get a rider in the next season. According to the book, Fire and Blood, the next rider of Vermithor was Hugh Hammer, a bastard dragonseed who claimed the dragon on Dragonstone but went rogue. Hugh Hammer was a craven, to say the least. He was a man of low character, not because of his birth, but because of his nature. Having said that, he did change the course of the war at the First Battle of Tumbleton. In this video, we'll explore how bastard he came to Westeros, who dragon seeds like Hugh are, and then dive very deep into the meteoric rise and steep fall of this blacksmith's son. Let's begin, shall we? Oh, and by the way, beware of the dragon-sized spoilers coming up ahead. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
Am I a bastard?
How did bastardy come to Westeros? So, the real origin of dragon seeds has its roots buried deep in history and dates back some 12,000 years before Aegon the Conqueror's invasion of Westeros. Many of you may know that Westeros was not always inhabited by men. Prior to that, the denizens of Westeros included beings like the children of the forest, giants, and other magical creatures. But then, the first men came to Westeros around 12,000 BC and brought with them certain customs and traditions. There are some good ones, like one should not kill a guest under their roof. This was the reason why Lord Manfred Mooten let nettles go when Queen Rhaneyra had ordered him to do otherwise. However, not all the traditions were good. One such evil tradition practiced in a few parts of Westeros was the rite of the first night that the warriors and the High Lords enjoyed. George R.R. Martin's book Fire and Blood gives an account of the first night practiced in the 9th year of Aegon's conquest of Westeros. After Black Haddon, the castle of Harrenhal was passed by Aegon to Ser Quentyn Quaheris, Aegon's former master of arms. After Quentyn's death, the castle moved into the hands of Gargan Quaheris, Quentyn's grandson. Now, Gargan was a lecherous man with an insatiable hunger for food and young brides. He would gatecrash all the weddings in his domain and the young girls for himself. However, the custom dates back ages. The Andals invaded Westeros after being driven by Valyrians from Andalos. In Westeros, they adopted the practice of First Night from the First Men, but during this time, the First Night was more meaningful and stood for something greater than just lust. According to Lord Albin Massey, the justiciar to the old King Jaehaerys, the First Men and the Andals respected only what was strong, and this is kind of similar to how the Dothraki operate. Now, during those times, one could become a warlord only if one knew how to kill people. Strength was equal to dominance and control. Life was simple back then, there was no politics, and strength was the only parameter necessary to gain command. Naturally, the sons of these warlords were also strong, and if some warlord wished to bless a maid with his seed on her first night, she and her husband often considered it a blessing, and the child born out of such a union was considered better and stronger than the rest. But this custom from the Dawn Age decayed as time passed, and instead of real warriors and heroes, it was fat, stout men who started impregnating women, and oftentimes these men couldn't even lift their own weight. But in recent times we have no record of the first night still being practiced. So, how did it come to an end? Well, the good Queen Alysanne is to be credited for this. After Jaehaerys became king, the kingdom found itself in peace and prosperity. There were no wars to be fought, and this gave the king and the queen ample time to travel throughout the realm and beyond. In one such trip, the couple was supposed to go to the north, but the king's plans were postponed because of his office work at the Red Keep. So the queen went alone to the north on Silverwing's back. Here, she learned from a woman about the disgusting practice, who herself was a victim. King Jaehaerys understood the gravity of the situation but was reluctant to act because he did not wish to interfere with local customs. However, when Grand Maester Bennifer also supported the queen, the king acquiesced to the demand, and every lord and knight was notified that practicing the first night would be a crime against the crown, and the culprits would be put to death. But does that mean that the practice ended? Well, not quite, but it transformed into something relatively more acceptable. The men in power continued sleeping with women apart from their wives, but they stopped thinking about it as their birthright. The children born out of such one-night stands became bastards of noble blood, and even had the privilege of being legitimized if the king wished so. Hugh Hammer was one of the dragon seeds, but who are they? George R.R. Martin writes in Fire and Blood, and I quote, "Though the first night was greatly resented elsewhere, such feelings were muted upon Dragonstone, where Targaryens were rightly regarded as being closer to gods than the common run of men. So, he makes it clear that Targaryens are indeed closer to gods than other men, and the small folk of Dragonstone knew that pretty well. Naturally, brides would willfully and happily offer to spread their legs on their wedding nights if a Targaryen wanted so, and the children who were born this way were celebrated and favoured because the lords of Dragonstone would shower the mother with gifts of gold and silk, in addition to huge pieces of land. These lucky bastards were born from a dragon seed, and eventually they would be referred to as dragon seeds, or quite simply, seeds. Queen Alysanne would have felt disgusted if she knew that her precious Dragonstone still housed the practice, but what of it? The good old queen is long dead. So, there were numerous dragon seeds on the island of Dragonstone. On any given day, you could see hundreds of men and women with silver hair just going about their daily lives, caring little about the fact that their fathers are highborns. So, when the Dance of Dragons started and each side tried its best to win, it was dragon seeds that proved to be a major turning point. It was known that Dragonstone had way more dragons than King's Landing. I mean, there was Vermithor, Silverwing, Seasmoke, Sheep Stealer, Cannibal, Grey Ghost, etc., etc. But there were not enough dragon riders to ride these magnificent creatures. So, Mushroom suggested to Prince Jacaerys that the dragon seeds should be put to use, and Prince Jacaerys turned to the dragon seeds and asked them to try and master the dragons. In return, the new dragon riders would be given huge pieces of lands, lofty titles, and their sons and daughters would also be ennobled and wed to the children of other lords. Many people tried to ride the unclaimed dragons of Dragonstone, and many perished. But a few of them succeeded. Among these were Nettles, Ulf White, Adam of Hull, and the star of today's video, Hugh the Hammer, the bastard of a blacksmith and a towering man. Which dragon did Hugh Hammer ride? Hugh Hammer claimed Vermithor, the dragon that was once ridden by the old king Jaehaerys. Vermithor was the largest dragon on Dragonstone and the second largest in the world, after Vhagar, the ride of Queen Visenya. In the show, Daemon goes to sing before Vermithor, as if trying to prepare the dragon for an upcoming fight. The dragon had been living without a rider for some 30 years until Daemon paid a visit. Vermithor had to be made accustomed to humans once again. The magnificent beast was still growing and would have probably outgrown Vhagar if things didn't end for Vermithor the way they did. We'll come to that in a bit. After claiming Vermithor, Hugh Hammer became one of the most powerful men in all 7 kingdoms because of the sheer strength that his dragon displayed. Why Vermithor chose Hugh is completely a mystery, but it is possible that Hugh Hammer may have had some sort of relationship with the old king. The reason I theorize this is the fact that Adam of Hull managed to claim Seasmoke, the dragon of Laenor Velaryon. Now, officially, Adam and his brother, Alyn, were the bastard sons of Ser Laenor. However, given that Ser Laenor preferred handsome squires to beautiful maidens, it seems difficult that he sired 2 sons. Some speculate that the 2 brothers were actually fathered by Ser Corlys Velaryon. Whatever the case, Adam was directly related to Ser Laenor. He was either Laenor's son or half-brother, so it is entirely possible that Hugh Hammer was also related to King Jaehaerys, but then again, this is just a theory. Hugh Hammer's affair with the Blacks. The Black faction considered themselves lucky to have a dragon like Vermithor in their ranks, and it wasn't before long that the time came when Hugh was asked to join the fight. So, after the death of Prince Lucerys Velaryon, his elder brother Jacaerys had become weary about the safety of his younger brother and half-siblings. He convinced the Prince of Pentos to foster Prince Viserys and Aegon, the sons of Rhaneyra, from Daemon. Both the boys were sent aboard a cog named Gay Abandon, which was to take them to Pentos. However, the Triarchy warships found the cog and the escort ships. Aegon the Younger managed to flee on his dragon Stormcloud, but Prince Viserys was abducted. He returned several years later after Aegon the Younger had become king. Prince Jacaerys found himself fuming at the attack on his half-brothers and wanted revenge. He left alone on his dragon Vermax to face the Triarchy, but soon enough other dragon riders followed him, and this party included Hugh Hammer and Vermithor. The dragons burned down numerous Triarchy ships, but the most unfortunate outcome of this battle at the Gullet was the loss of Prince Jacaerys, the Prince of Dragonstone and heir to the throne. And yet, Hugh Hammer and Ulf White were later found at a tavern, filling their bellies with wine and boasting about their recent victory. "We are knights now, truly," Hard Hugh declared, and Ulf laughed and said, "Fie on that! We should be lords!" After a few battles and some mind games, Rhaenyra was able to take King's Landing, and Hugh Hammer followed her shortly after. According to Mushroom, Hugh Hammer celebrated this victory by beating one of the Queen's household knights to death in a brothel on the Street of Silk when the 2 men quarreled over the maidenhood of a young virgin. Furthermore, he was knighted and given a small land on one of the islands controlled by Corlys Velaryon, the Hand of the Queen. Later, Hugh Hammer and Ulf White were sent to Tumbleton, the last stronghold that was loyal to Rhaenyra between a massive Hightower army and King's Landing. The Dragon Seeds were sent there to defend Tumbleton, but everything changed when the two of them betrayed Rhaenyra's cause and joined the Greens instead. But why? Why did Hugh Hammer betray Rhaenyra? Tumbleton was the seat of House Footley. It was a small market town of peace and quiet that sat on the banks of River Manda. Although the castle itself was guarded by not more than 200 men, many thousand more had come from places far south like Longtable and Bitterbridge. Furthermore, a strong force of river lords also joined these men, which stiffened the resolve and swelled the numbers. The Black faction was still celebrating the victory at the Butcher's Ball, where Ser Criston Cole had been slain. In total, Queen Rhaenyra Targaryen was being represented by almost 9,000 men at Tumbleton. Under this situation, Silverwing and Vermithor came with Ulf White and Hugh Hammer. The Black faction further rejoiced. The dragons only meant that their victory had now been sealed. They welcomed the arrival of these dragons, but they were oblivious to the horrors that were about to befall them. And not far away from there lay a small host of the Hightowers, who were clearly trembling in fear of being slaughtered. So, what was this tragedy? Well, not long before the actual battle started, a few men of the Hightower camp fled and ran to the Blacks. In reality, they were still a part of the army and were sent to infiltrate the Blacks. Lord Owain Borney and Sir Roger Corn were secret supporters of Rhaenyra's half-brother, and they were the first to defect. Their defection would have counted for nothing, to be honest, but they managed to change the allegiance of Hugh Hammer and Ulf White. But why did they do that? I mean, why did they choose to betray the woman who gave them everything they now possessed? Clearly, both men did not necessarily have any strong character. I'm not saying this because they were from the small folk, but because they were inherently cravens. Hugh Hammer was the rider of the second largest dragon, and he was a man of tall and strong build, but he had never faced an army, never taken part in a battle. He'd only gotten into brawls with other men up until this point, and seeing the glittering spear points of the Hightower host in the sun probably scared him in his bones. Furthermore, he didn't want to fight Tessarion, despite the fact that Tessarion was a much smaller dragon than Vermithor. When Hugh had fought in the Gullet, he was probably more confident because there were no dragons on the opposing side, and 4 dragons on his side. But there was one more reason, a reason that was more practical than all the rest. Hugh Hammer was motivated by avarice instead of cowardice. Honor was not something that he cared about, right? And his actions were always motivated by a lust for power and wealth. Despite being knighted, he wanted more, and he wanted to be a lord. When Lords Stockworth and Roseby were executed, Daemon had suggested that Hugh and White should be given the castles, but Rhaenyra wished against it. Furthermore, seats of great houses like Baratheon and Lannister were also dangled before these men, but the Queen once again vetoed the suggestion. They probably believed that King Aegon could offer them bigger and better castles, honours and titles. It's quite possible that certain promises were made to these two betrayers. When the battle started, Rhaenyra's brave men were marching on the path of a great victory over the Hightower host, and they were so drunk with the spirit of battle that even Tessarion's sight could not thin their resolve. But then the worst came to place, and Vermithor and Silverwing took to the sky with their riders. In a jiffy, the market town of Tumbleton had turned into a field of fire. Shops, homes, septs, people, everything burned. The loud cries and roars of dragons were covered in the shrieks and cries of the many men, women, and children that burned to their deaths. And just like that, the first battle of Tumbleton changed the course of the battle, and Rhaenyra not only lost a strategic castle, but also 2 great dragons and a powerful army. Fate of Hugh Hammer. The cheers of victory soon came to a halt as the Green faction learned about Aemon's death. He'd been slain near Harrenhal by Daemon and Caraxes, and even Aemon's dragon was dead. This, of course, made Hugh feel like the strongest man alive, because honestly, dragons were like the very nukes of Westeros. As hard Hugh learned about Aemon's death and Aegon's disappearance, he started to believe that he was worthy enough to become the king. He told this to Daeron Targaryen, and the young prince was justifiably fuming. When asked what gave him the right to become the king, Hugh claimed the same right that Aegon the Conqueror had: dragons. But the highborn knights and lords would not have a bastard sit on the Iron Throne, and a secret meeting was called in to discuss what was to be done with Hugh Hammer and Ulf White. Killing White would have been easy because he was drunk more often than not, and neither did he have any considerable military skills. However, Hugh Hammer was not being protected by a bunch of sellswords and other soldiers. These were men who wanted to earn his favor. But then a plan was made to kill Hugh. However, it got interrupted when Adam Valerian came with his dragon Seasmoke. He was a bastard who had been legitimized by Rhaneyra at the request of Corlys Valerian. However, after the stunt was pulled off by the two betrayers, Rhaneyra believed that even Adam would betray her, and a kill order was issued. Adam had escaped his fate and had come to take back Tumbleton from the two betrayers. Why was he doing this? Well, he wanted to prove to Rhaneyra that not all bastards were betrayers. Anyway, as the battle started, Hugh Hammer was preparing to reach his dragon Vermithor, but before he could do that, a knight named Sir John Roxton killed Hugh with the Valyrian steel sword named Orphan Maker. And that, my friends, was the end of Hugh Hammer, the corrupt and indecent dragon seed who served no one but himself and paid for it with his very life. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.